in order. Damon Knight founded this organization in 1965. And why did he do this? He felt this field needed a unified body to protect the interests of science fiction writers. He wanted an organization where writers could come together harmoniously and calmly to discuss their working relationships with editors, agents, and publishers. He wanted an organization where the collective good of the field triumphed over politics. He wanted an organization that could put more energy into bettering contract terms and revising award-giving rules. So what the hell are we doing with SIFWA? That's what I want to know. So we first gathered together here in 1966, which is when the awards for the achievement of 1965 were handed out. And as today, we met in New York back then, not that I met in New York, but some of the people here were there. And this was at the New York Press Club, near the New York Public Library, over at between 40 and 41st Street. And there were about 100 people there. Most of the attendees at SIFWA back then, a lot of the membership were East Coast, even though there were people all across the country. And I sort of feel we're eating their leftovers here, but the less said about that, the better. But that night we had the usual SIFWA scenes that we always have. And I'm told that one of the relevant things that happened that night, I'm just told this, so it's an allegedly thing, Anne McCaffrey was loudly reprimanding a reporter who happened to be here, who turned to Bob Silverberg and said, "So have you written anything?" And that caused one of these SIFWA scenes. And the first thing we're going to do here before we get on with the main event of the night is we want to make sure that this will stop happening to some of you, right? So, I mean, we can't really stop non-science fiction and fantasy people from coming up to you and say, "So have you written anything that I might have read?" But we can make sure that no one's going to wonder who the Nebula nominees are or have been. So before we get into the award ceremony proper, we're going to have SIFWA Secretary Michael Burstein say a few words and say the membership here. But first I want to tell you something about Michael. And what can I say? What can I say about Michael's rapid success here in science fiction that hasn't been said about Gary Coleman, for instance? You know, his first published story, it is your first published story, Teleabsence was your first published story, right? Appeared in the July 95 Analog. It not only got him the Hugo nomination, but it was the driving force behind him winning the Campbell that year for Best New Writer. And I don't want to really, what? Okay, correct me, whatever. But I don't want to make any predictions about what it means to win this award. So you might be a little worried, Michael, because you could burn out like there are a lot of promising newcomers who are burned out. And, only time is going to tell whether you're going to end up like the 1978 Campbell winner, Orson Scott Card, or you're going to end up forgotten, vanished, old and embittered, like the most promising new author of 1956. Which that was what the award was called before it ended up being called the Campbell. So I'm really hoping that you don't end up unwatched, washed up, unread like Bob Silverberg. Who, you know, I mean, currently Bob is he's living off Karen Haber's income, writing reviews for August, and that's really what's paying his way these days. So, Michael, the choice is really up to you. So we're hoping for you. So you can come up here.
You know, there's a lot of people in this room that I admire, and Scott isn't one of them. So. I'm actually up here for a specific reason. One part of which is that I said to Paul, if I don't win, I'll never have a chance to get up in front of SIFWA again, because I'm never running for office again. Please let me do something at the microphone. But the real reason I'm up here is because of a tradition that SIFWA instituted last year, which we actually did at the business meeting last year at the Pittsburgh Nebulas, but we decided it would be a little more appropriate to do tonight at the banquet. And that is a presentation of Nebula nominee pins. Some of you in the banquet hall may be wearing these already. What happened was that we decided as an organization that it would be nice to recognize the Nebula nominees in the same way Hugo nominees are recognized every year with some sort of pin. And we decided that we would have to pins and get them distributed to all the previous nominees. The pins actually have a lot of people, I had nothing to do with them except for being on the board who voted them. There's a bunch of people who deserve credit for the presentation of the pins. To begin with, they were Rob Sawyer's idea, which Paul Levinson then, when he became president, took over and said, this idea must go forward because this would be a nice way to recognize all the Nebula nominees in our midst because all the nominees are winners. He looked for a volunteer to actually get the pins produced, and he found that volunteer in Treasurer Ian Randall Strock. Ian was more than willing to do the work necessary to get all of the pins made. We also needed to get artwork for the pins. And Bob Eggleton donated his time and services to SIPWA, so everybody who's wearing one of these pins is wearing Bob Eggleton artwork. I've been told it should be worn with the star streaming coming out the bottom, it's supposed to be coming towards you. To get the pins to everybody been nominated since 1965, we asked Alan Steele to distribute them, to dig out addresses, get pins to heirs of people who are now deceased. He did a fabulous job getting the pins to as many people as possible. And then finally now Michael Lee Pendleton has taken over the job. What I've done is culled the list of first-time nominees this year. And what I'd like to ask is for those first-time nominees to please come forward and I will give you your pin. I'm also going to read the names aloud first. Please, if you decide to applaud, please hold your applause to the end until everybody is up here and has gotten a pin. The categories are, the new nominees are, first of all, there is a new script category. The nominees who are all new to getting a Nebula nomination are Brad Bird, Tim McCandless, Larry Wachowski, Andy Wachowski, John Norman, M. Night Shyamalan, and Robert Avrek. So if any of you are here, you should come forward. The short story nominees are Francis Sherwood, Constance Ashe, and Leslie Watt, who are new nominees. In novelette, Brian A. Hopkins, Stanley Schmidt, and Mary A. Terzillo. In novella, L. Timmel Duchamp, Andy Duncan, and David Marisek. And in novel, Sean Stewart and Ken McLeod. So both of you come up here and I will... Thank you all very much.
Thanks, Michael. Last year, the Toastmaster was Stan Schmidt, editor of Analog, and he proved to the crowd exactly why he's been able to edit Analog for so long. Everyone who was here there in Pittsburgh heard him tell a story of how he was flying a prop plane, right? Took a picture of the propeller with his camera, was able to do these arcane calculations of the shutter speed, and was able to use that to figure out how fast the plane was going. That's why it's here Analog, and I have to tell you that the Toastmaster now at the moment happens to be a guy who, when he's on a prop plane, looks out the window at the propeller, he says, how the hell does it stay in the air? So, and if I perhaps paid attention to aerodynamics, I might have a job still. That's all I can say. That's the important difference. But I know that there's not really no more science fiction age just because of that. And there's really one person who's in this room who I can blame for the death of science fiction age, and I think it's time to out him, and that man is Paul Levinson. And when Paul Levinson, our president, who really around the house I refer to as Dr. Evil, he asked me to be Toastmaster, and I'm really generally a happy-go-lucky kind of guy. I've been editing Science Fiction Age for 8 years. It seemed like it would go on forever, and there were Hugo nominations and Nebula nominations, and more importantly, I had the privilege of taking a lollipop out of Ellen Dadlow's mouth and putting up my nose. But who hasn't here? That's the most important thing to know. And then the request comes from Paul. He says, you want to be Toastmaster? Within 3 months, it was dead. That was it. And I say, who do I blame for this? Do I blame the publisher at Sovereign Media, Mark Kintz, who for years has tried to uphold the fine publishing traditions of Hugo Gernsback, issue of Science Fiction Age. No, it is Paul. I'm not bitter. It is Paul Levinson who is responsible for this. As soon as he asked me to be postmaster, it all fell apart. Within a month of them asking me, they asked me to be editorial director over all the magazines, the wonderful military history magazines and Lockhold magazines and so forth, so that less of my time was devoted to science fiction. I say, this is the secret that the publishers have. Right, Tom, you know this. The secret the publishers have. Editors are too important to edit. That is the main secret that all the publishers know. So, the axe fell on Age so that I had more time to spend tracking down scoops about the hygiene of WWF wrestlers. And thank you, Paul. Thank you, Paul. You bastard. And what's worse than that is coming up here. He thinks he's doing me a favor by having me come up here and talk to people. And you've been around, Paul. You know what it means to come up here because he hates me. That's really what it is. I've been going to these things, and there's something that's worse than the nebulous, and that's what happens after the nebulous. That man, you see Gardner over there? Let me tell you what happens after the nebulous. What happens after the nebulous is you go sit at the bar, and there's Gardner, and there's Ginger, wherever Ginger is, right? And they sit there and they go, Barbara Marx Hubbard, is he better than Barbara Marx Hubbard? Or how is that performance compared to Barbara Marx Hubbard? And they said, well, you know, he was a little better than that Cajun comedian. He was a little bit, but you know, it's been... got this odd light in his eye, and he's looking at you, run the other way. You know, FNSF has lasted a long time, but that'll be the end of it. So now, ladies and gentlemen, I have to introduce to you a man who is a 6-time Hugo Nebulin Sturgeon Award nominee, the man who you know of as your president, but the man who I think of as a person who destroyed my science fiction career, Paul Levinson.
Is completely true. And the reason why I did it is he never bought any of my stories. I had to do what I could. But actually, we have one little bit of unfinished business regarding our previous speaker, Michael Burstein, because he too is a first-time Nebula nominee this year for his novella. So, Michael, I have a little pen for you. And while we're on the subject of Michael Burstein, I think it's also appropriate to mention, as he himself said, that he's concluding his 2 years as secretary of our organization. And I wanted to publicly thank him for the great job that he's done. Ian Randall Struck, our treasurer. Ian, is that here? Is that writing checks somewhere? Oh, okay, there it is. Is also concluding his server. And Crispin, our vice president, is concluding her term as vice president, and this concludes also 9 years. Talk about taking leave of your senses. 9 years of service to this organization as Eastern Regional Director. And Michael Armstrong is also concluding his 3-year term as Western Regional Director. So, thank you. We have a few new officers coming in, though after Scott's talk, I expect there might be some resignations. Terry McGarry, who's sitting right up here, who's done a really spectacular job, along with Sheila Williams. but she's also our new vice president. And we have a new secretary, Kathy Wentworth. Kathy? Our new treasurer is up in Schenectady, Chuck Rothman, desperately pulling his hair out and going over the books because he knows what's in store for him. He's not here with us tonight, but let's give Chuck a round of applause. Our new Western Regional Director is here with us, Howard Hendricks, the tallest officer. Who, as I mentioned this morning, I believe he's been in that post since the year 1627, Sam Lundwall. We also have 3 former presidents with us tonight. I'm very pleased about that. Fred Pohl. These former presidents no doubt know very well, our organization is really only as good as the people who serve in the organization. We do have one more or less full-time paid employee who does a lot of work, but there's so much work to do in our organization that volunteers are really what makes the organization tick and run. And several years ago, in the Michael Capobianco administration, it was decided to give a special award from time to time at the President's sole discretion called the Service to SIFWA Award. And I've been thinking about who to give the award to this year, and there are many, many candidates. But as I thought things over, and as I reflected on the fact that this is the 35th year of our organization, and who has been working for the organization, not just this year, last year, even in the past 5 years, but rather who has been working for the organization almost throughout these 35 years. Well, there were 2 names that became clearer and clearer to me. One of these people was editor of the Bulletin for 5 years, that's the Simple Bulletin, in the 1970s. Then he and this other person were co-editors of the Bulletin for 10 years, in the mid-80s to early 90s. One of these people, also for 12 years, was the mastermind behind the annual Nebula Award Volume that we publish. Actually, we don't publish it. We found a publisher to publish it, but we put it together. The other person edited 3 of these volumes. They've served on countless committees. And furthermore, they've been available to me as president on the phone on numerous occasions with invariably helpful and sage advice. Not only that, but these 2 people are extraordinary writers. And our organization is about writing. And although we want people to serve in our organization, it should never be a service that sacrifices the raison d'etre of SFWA, which is to write and have published science fiction and fantasy. One of the recipients of tonight's Service to SIFWA Award, in fact, won an award just last year, the Campbell Award, the best novel, Root Orbits. And the other recipient won a Nebula Award in the 90s for her hilarious send-up story, Danny Goes to Mars. So it's my pleasure tonight to give the Service to SIFWA Award to 2 wonderful, hardworking people, George Zabrowski and Pamela Sargent.
the chance to work for my fellow writers has made it a lot less lonely for me. So thank you very much.
President Levinson, we've worked behind the scenes for so long that, although we're very happy to have this, but I'm afraid you've blown our cover. Thank you.
And you'll notice that they continue to serve SIFWA with very, very brief acceptance. Well, the next award is something that's very special in our organization. It's called the Author Emeritus Award. It's a very special kind of author. As I'll explain in a few minutes, I think the title is perhaps not quite appropriate for this year's recipient. Some of you may remember last night, I don't know if your memory goes back that far, I was talking in Barnes & Noble about the fall of 1959 when I was banished from my junior high school library. And for those of you who weren't there, it was because the librarian, Mrs. Dason, was concerned that I was reading only science fiction. And she was concerned that my mind would be thoroughly ruined. And actually she was right, except I think my mind was ruined beforehand. But the story had a happy ending because I discovered my local New York Public Library branch. Well, that was last night's story. Tonight I'll tell a little sequel in the great tradition of writing. It's always good to have a sequel. About 2 months after I first started going to the New York Public Library branch, I noticed that they not only had books, but they had digests on a rack, and they were invariably dog-eared, yellow, and they weren't that old. I don't know why they looked so bad. But sometime in mid-October, I picked up a copy of the April 1959 issue of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction. And I remember to this day, it was a cool but not very cold day, and I walked down to Bronx Park, sat on a bench, and began reading a story in that magazine. And I had read wonderful science fiction prior to this. Heinlein, Asimov, Clarke, all the greats. But I never had encountered a story like this. It wasn't a story about spaceships. It wasn't a story about aliens. It wasn't a story about time travel or teleportation or ESP. It was a story about how someone might become more intelligent. I mean, that's something that appealed to me at the time. And even more striking, it was a story about what might happen to a person who was extraordinarily intelligent, who began realizing that they were losing that intelligence. It's a very provocative theme, especially for a 12-year-old who thinks that things will only get better in life. Now I know that's not quite true. In fact, I'm probably less intelligent now than I was last night. I was pleased to see as I got older that many other people share my view of this story that it grabbed hold of my soul in 1959. In fact, the story is assigned reading in many junior high schools, and people still love it, notwithstanding that. It's a story whose author has written other things, but all this author had to write was that one story, just that one story, which in my opinion, and the opinion of many others, puts this author in the same league with Poe, Guy de Maupassant, O. Henry, the great short fiction writers of the last century and the beginning of this century. And you know, the short story has been battered by many things, by the novel, by motion pictures, by television, more recently chat rooms. But this short story endures. Now, the award that I'm going to present is called the Author Emeritus, but I said that it's not quite apt. And that's because emeritus, as some of you may know, in the academic world, refers to someone who's retired this story, Flowers for Algernon, will never be retired. In fact, I'm sure that 100 years from now, whether in New York City or on whatever starship or planet the 135th Nebula Awards banquet will be held, this story will still be talked about. So it's my honor, privilege, and pleasure to present the author emeritus this year to the author of Flowers for Algernon, Daniel Keyes.
Nobody told me this was going to happen. Phew. I got to catch my breath there, Hope. Forgive me, these trifocals don't work too well. It's hard to know how to respond to an honor like this. You know, 2 months ago, the Board of Trustees at Ohio University awarded me the title of Professor Emeritus. Now, I can handle that. You know, because I indeed retired from teaching fiction writing at the university. Now, author emeritus, you know, it's an overwhelming honor. Make no mistake, I accept it. You know? But I don't think of myself as retired from writing, as Cole generously beat me to the punch. I don't intend to stop writing. And in fact, it's my plan that when I do leave this world, I'll have paper and pencil with me to take notes along the way. I realize, as has been pointed out here, that this recognition is for one story published 41 years ago, and the novel version published 35 years ago. When I last stood before the Nebula Awards audience in New York in 1967, it was to receive the Nebula for Flowers for Algernon. It had already won the Hugo, and it had been made into a teleplay. To this day, I recall the moment Bob Silverberg handed me the Nebula. Because as he walked off, he nudged me, whispered in my ear, and said, "Dan, you sure got a lot of mileage out of that story." And that was before Charlie and Cliff Robertson, and before the dramatic musical. You know, Michael Crawford played Charlie in London. How do you know that? That's how he got the job at Phantom of the Opera. A terrific Charlie with a dancing mouse. Last week, I signed contracts for a new edition in Taiwan and a new stage play in Japan. I mean, this goes on and on and on. We're getting towards that 100-year mark, I think. Once, Isaac Asimov wrote me a note. He had sort of praised it at the Hugo Awards and wrote that wonderful little introduction in the Hugo winners, in which he claims to have asked the muses, you know, how did he do it, how did he do it? And then he says, I tugged his sleeve and said to him, when you find out how I did it, will you tell me? I'd like to do it again. About a year later, he sent me a note. I don't know if it was a year later. It was later. He wrote me a note saying, "Dan, I hope that someday you will not come to hate Flowers for Algernon, because everything you write after that will be in its shadow and will be compared to it. And I don't want it to happen to you what happened to me with Nightfall." Well, it hasn't. I mean, Flowers changed my life in many ways. But I've all my life, of course, kept searching. How did I do it? How did I do it? And about 3 months ago, I published my memoir, my autobiography. I figured nobody else was going to do it, so I better get to work. You know? Called it Algernon, Charlie, and I, A Writer's Journey, and in that, I did search for those seeds, that first moment, the first idea first occurred to me. And I was standing on the subway train in Brooklyn on my way to class at NYU pre-med. I was 17 and a half. And just hit by that thought, that my education was driving a wedge between me and the people I loved, my parents who were uneducated. And that's when I had that, what would happen if it were possible to increase human intelligence artificially? And family and friends. It's that old, that long, that many years I struggled over it. I think of Algernon, Charlie, and I as kind of a companion to Flowers, a handbook for these teachers, teaching it all over the country. That amazes me. But probably most of all, I think of it as a survival guide for other writers, because very few people know what the hell I actually went through. Not only to write it, but to keep it from being destroyed by editors who wanted to change it for happy endings. I won't name names right now, but some of them. And movie people who wanted to make happy endings, and television people who want to make happy endings. But every one of them ended up coming to me and saying, no, I can't do it. In fact, Cliff Robertson told me the story. I said to him, Cliff, how is it possible that you kept that downbeat ending? U.S. Steel and Theatre Guild had never had a downbeat ending. He said, let me tell you the story, Dan. He said, I wanted to keep the original ending of Flowers. Charlie loses it all. And so did the screenwriter. But the U.S. Steel people, Theatre Guild people said, we can't have that. He said, so they came up with a compromise. There I am at the end, Algernon's grave, the flowers, and I'm turning the pages of the book I can no longer read. And this is what I was supposed to do. Fade out. I said, Cliff, I saw it. I didn't see that. He said, Dan, that was live TV. He said, Charlie wouldn't let me do it. He said, we went off the air and everybody jumped down my throat. You son of a bitch, you bastard. You're through. You're never going to act again. See? Well, I was nominated for one of the awards. Lost out to Maurice Evans doing Macbeth. I can accept that. But then, of course, Cliff laid across the table, said he bought the movie rights. He said he was always a bridesmaid, never a bride, in The Hustler and Days of Wine and Roses. So he bought the rights. He said to me, but Dan, in a full-length television, a full-length feature film theater, you can't have that kind of downbeat. The audience, he said, how would it be if Algernon is lying in the corner of the maze, and we all think he's dead, and suddenly he lifts his snout, he wiggles his whiskers, and he runs the maze. I said, Cliff, leave me alone. I'm writing the novel version. I don't want to hear about it. It's your movie. You pay. You do what you want. When he came into Ohio University, he flew his own plane in. He got off the plane. He said, Dan, you'll be proud of me. We kept that downbeat ending. Of course, I later discovered that he really tried to get Ralph Nelson, the director, who was in London, to find a mouse that could wiggle its whiskers and run that maze, but Nelson couldn't find a mouse. So they kept the downbeat ending. As I accept this award, gracefully, gratefully, I'd like to set the record straight about why I've stopped writing science fiction stories. It was always my habit to wait until a story of mine was published before I began a new one, before I wrote a new one. I don't advise that for you, but that's the way I work. I'm a slow writer. The last story I wrote in the 1970s, at the request of a well-known anthologist, it's called Mama's Girl. I mean, I'd gotten a dozen letters from this well-known anthologist cursing me. You were lazy. You were created by a malign god to torture me. I need that story. So I wrote the story. I'm still waiting to see it published. I think something signed with the anthology, Last Dangerous Visions. Well, I've kept writing, but in a sense, I tried to segue into a kind. Yeah, when I was working on flowers, I remember vividly. I was sitting in a bar, and I thought to myself, well, now, is it going to be a commercial story where I get immediate success, what have you, maybe good money, or is it going to be, a literary story? And the hell with everything, and try to make it the best I can make it, not care. And I said to myself, I remember using this expression, it's like trying to sit on two stools. And really you fall between them. Well, I still got the marks on my butt from those two stools I was sitting on, because I guess I went both ways, and I guess I've never regretted it. Oddly enough, though, most of my fame and fortune has come not from the States, from Japan. Flowers was never a bestseller here. First printing was 5,000 copies, sold out right away. They printed another 1,000 copies, and they printed another 1,000. It may have sold 60,000 copies over the years. In Japan, my last royalty statement, the Japanese public, 1.5 million hardcover copies in Japan. And they've just issued the paperback of all my books in Japan. In fact, I ordered some Japanese copies here for some people from Japan. What's that?
The people with the camera.
Book TV, right? Okay. Yes. In fact, last November, my Japanese publisher Hiroshi Hayakawa brought me to Tokyo the second time. Flowers for Algernon had hit the top of the bestseller list. Then they bought The Fifth Sally, which sold hundreds of thousands of copies. The Mines of Billy Milligan, 1 million copies. The sequel, 1 million copies, has not yet been published yet. Adams bought it, paid for it, and they're waiting for the movie version of the first. The Japanese won't wait. So, interestingly enough, everybody says to me, how come the Japanese people really care so much for your work? And I asked my editor when he came here. He says, well, you're the first writer from whom the Japanese people, readers, have seen psychological insights into character, understanding of human personality and depth. He says, you've got a lot of imitators now in Japan. But interesting, again, in that trip to Japan, every place I was interviewing, I was asked, what message do you have for the Japanese people? And message. I remember Goldman saying, if I wanted to send messages, I'd call Western Union. Because we don't think of messages in our writing. But my Japanese readers wanted messages. And I discovered that when I was there, it was a great shock. This was last November, I was back in Japan. Great shock going among the people to discover the violence among the young. Young people shooting and killing in a society which had never had any of this happen. And I remembered Columbine, and thinking of what's happening here in the States. And I wondered, so message, what kind of message would Charlie have given people when asked, where is this youthful violence coming from? Where is this attack by young people coming from? And I remembered, not in the short version, but in the novel, near the end, Charlie comes up with this hypothesis that intelligence without the ability to give and receive affection leads to violence, destruction. I don't remember the exact words, I haven't read it in a long time, but leads to suffering and death. In a sense, Charlie, I learned from Charlie, of course. And I thought of the message he would give, and because when we speak about who's to blame, I mean, after Columbine, after the shootings here, it was, well, the parents are to blame. No society, no television is to blame. No, the kids themselves are to blame. No, Finally, I came up with an answer that I used in Japan.
I think what we're teaching our very young people is to blame. We're teaching competition, violence, beat at all odds, win at all odds, attack. We're not teaching empathy. And of course, this is something very dear to the Japanese mind, empathy. I mean, I try to explain to one of my interviewers, I was sitting at one end of the table, and we were talking, and one of the editors was at the far end of the table, and suddenly she got up and walked over and brought me a new glass of water. She sensed that I was thirsty. She was thinking and feeling what I was feeling. I said to myself, this is what we've got to teach our young people, empathy. Everything else is okay, but that's somehow missing from our universal education. How do you teach empathy? Well, you know, kids in school, younger grades, instead of just a competition, the child writes down what she is feeling, what he is feeling. It's only the teacher, and everybody tries to guess. And the one who can feel what that child is feeling gets a star. Put a premium on feeling what other people are feeling. Why is that important to writers? Well, you know as well as I do. To create a character, you have to empathize with that character. You have to feel what that character is feeling. You know, somebody last night here asked me the same question, oh, not here, it was at Barnes & Noble, asked the same question I've been asked a dozen times. How could I write from the point of view, first person, of a developmentally disabled person? And I said, you know, remember when Flaubert was asked how he could write through the mind of a woman? He said, Madame Bovary, c'est moi. I'm Charlie. Charlie's dreams are my dreams. Charlie's hope. In a sense, I empathized with a person I never thought I could have any empathetic relationship with. I mean, I'd gotten that idea what would happen if I tried for years to come up with a character. A criminal, a plumber, a truck driver. I mean, I have about 50 false attempts. It took me a long time to write that stuff. And it was only the first year I was teaching high school out in Brooklyn. They'd given me two kinds of classes to teach. A class of gifted students. To get into those creative writing classes of mine, I had two of them. The lowest IEQ you could have was 120. I've never gotten less than A in English. I had two such classes, 25 students each. Tell them to rewrite, forget it. They wouldn't rewrite. They were gifted. As if to compensate for that, the administration gave me two of what they call special classes. Highest IQ is 80 for those classes. You can see the administrative mind averaging the two groups together. 120, he's teaching normal kids. First week I was teaching a slow group. Bell rang. All the kids dashed out to the can for cigars, smokes, what have you. One boy, I can see him as if he's in front of me today, right hand corner of the room near the windows, came shuffling up to me. He had on a football player's parka. He said, Mr. Keyes, can I ask you a question? Sure. This is a dummy class, isn't it? I was taken aback. No, this is a dummy class. Regular class, we just go science. I know this is a dummy class. If I try hard and I get smart before the end of the term, when you put me in a regular class, I want to be smart. Wow. You know, this hit me with an impact that I still feel today. I felt what he was feeling. It never occurred to me that a person of low intelligence wanted the same thing I wanted, to be smarter than I was. Of course, he became Charlie Gordon. I knew nothing more about it. At the end of the term, I got him into a regular class. I don't know what's happened to him since. But that ability to empathize with him and then to fill that empathy with my own memories, my own dreams, my own accidents of life is what created Flowers for Algernon. And in a strange sense, of course, he didn't stop haunting me. That's why I had to write the novel. I kept thinking about it. Empathy is something I think that every one of us needs. I don't think it's a solution to all our problems, but I think it's something we have been avoiding. Feel what the other person is feeling. Don't just feel sorry for them. What is the feeling? When I came to write the book about the minds of Billy Milligan, about a young man with 24 personalities, His sister had read Flowers for Algernon. He gave it to him to read, and he decided he wanted me to write his life story. But I'll never forget his words. This long table, his attorneys were there, found not guilty by reason of insanity. He said to his attorneys, I want Daniel Keyes to write my life story. And they looked at me and said, I want you to stand in my shoes the way you stood in Charlie's. And that got me. It's tough to empathize with Billy Milligan with his 24 personalities, but I tried. You know, the problem is, of course, I'm terrible at remembering names. I mean, I'm great at remembering faces. So, for the winners tonight, accept my congratulations. I think Isaac Asimov would have approved of the moment when I left Japan. The translator wanted to give, I brought gifts as we always do, translator, she wanted to give me a gift. And she dug into her purse, brought out in a little plastic folder, a little calling card. And it said on it, Isaac Asimov, Natural Resource. And that was her gift to me, which I now have in the Hugo Awards. So writers, empathize with your characters, create characters that will go beyond yourself, and I'll be going with you all along. Thank you.
Well, we've had many changes in the field since we got together in Pittsburgh. Now, some of those changes and the predictions that we've had for the state of the field make the critics' reviews of Battlefield Earth look upbeat by comparison. but there are signs of life here. More books sold to people in 1999 than at any time in history. But I really don't want to take any time to talk about the future because after tonight I won't have one. So I just want to take a little bit of time to talk about the past here. And as I said, the first time the nebulars were held 35 years ago was less than half a mile away. And New York, to me, has always seemed to be science fiction's ground zero. It's a sad, importantly for us, a magazine called Modern Electronics. And it's in this magazine around 1911 he started to publish what he called scientific fiction. And it was so well received, he said, okay, can this new form of fiction stand on its own? So in 1924 he sent out flyers to people saying, would you subscribe to a new magazine to be called Scientific Fiction? Bomb. Disaster. So he gave up, and that might have been the end of it. And then there we remain. All the stories would be in other magazines. There'd be no science fiction magazines, no tent we could gather together under. And he stopped and he finally said, scientific fiction, what the hell am I thinking of? What kind of name is that for a magazine? That's an exact quote. That's what he said. So he said, okay, let me try again. I'm not going to do this stupid market research. Let me just publish a magazine. In April 1926, he starts Amazing Stories, and we don't want to go into here how we ended up not having Amazing Stories. But Amazing Stories just could not die. I mean, taken over by Bernard McFadden, taken over by Zip Davis, and this Sol Cohen and TSR, and Dungeons and Dragons, and Hasbro, and I thought I had Warren LaPointe's name here. And it's very weird, but you know, Amazing is a historic property that should be kept alive and have landmark status for us. But it's not just the magazine that brings us here, it's what happened after the magazine that really brings us here. And to me, it's what helped make New York in the 30s through the 50s. To me, it was Paris in the 20s. And in 1934, Hugo starts a club. He calls it the Science Fiction League. He wants to sell more magazines. It's a ploy. You know, we could use more ploys like that to sell magazines, but it more than sell magazines. It was a catalyst that brought people together. And one of those poor, foolish youths sucked in was a 15-year-old boy named Fred Pohl, who joins the Brooklyn chapter of the Science Fiction League, and you'll correct all these things later, Fred. And Gernsback was Gatham Young. Cyril Kornbluth, 15, joins the Washington Heights Science Fiction League. And other kids, people who would not have known each other separately without the excuse of this club that Gernsback comes up with, found each other and found people they could be with who could understand who they are. And it came to pass that on September 18, 1938, the Futurian Science Literary Society decided to meet. And of course, they meet in Brooklyn at a Flatbush Young Communist League. That's the place where you have to go if you want to have a meeting in Brooklyn, 730 Nostrand Avenue. And some of the people who were there, Fred Pohl, Cyril Kornbluth, Isaac Asimov, Bob Lowndes, Richard Wilson is there, and Don Wollheim, who I don't know what happened to him, but he was there. And then they decide, well, we're getting too big. They go to Fort Tryon Park, picking up people along the way. James Blish, who's 17, lived in New Jersey, decides to join. But there's an ex-Brooklyn line I've got to tell you, New Jersey, don't get confused, New Jersey's part of New York. Everyone who lives in New York, okay, throw things. Then they decide to move elsewhere in Brooklyn on Bergen Street, and they finally rent a house in the Kensington section of Brooklyn, and they get thrown out after they're singing the Mikado too late at night. Treasury agents start to show up because they think these weird, strange people are running counterfeiting leagues, so the landlord throws them out. They move to Bedford Avenue on the 4th floor. They dub this thing the Ivory Tower. Don Wollheim moves in. Richard Wilson moves in. And I don't know, I grew up in Brooklyn, and I try to picture these times. They talk of trying to sneak over to Asimov's parents' candy store to steal malteds when not looking. Asimov is going around walking over the Brooklyn Bridge to deliver manuscripts to Campbell to save some fare. And in Manhattan, same thing's going on. Virginia kid Judy Merrill move in next door to each other, 2 apartments. They knock down a wall and a closet in between. They call it the parallax. And Merrill moves out. James Blish moves in. I mean, the whole thing. If that's too old for you, I want you to have this mental image here. Silverberg and Ellison, 611 West 114th Street, up near Columbia University, rooming together. Right? Picture that. Forget Felix Unger and Oscar Madison. That's the odd couple for you. And there's a short story in there. And Michael, you got to get it published on the ballot next year. I know there's a story in there. But it's not just writers. It's publishers. You go through the addresses. And I think of New York, we could draw this web to all the points in New York. And FNSF was at East 53rd for a while, and Galaxy at 421 Hudson, Astounding 79 7th Avenue. Wollheim starting Dog Books as a subsidiary of NAL at 1301 Avenue of the Americas, and that's another phrase for non-New Yorkers. That's a word we use so you get lost. It's really 6th Avenue, and we just call it Avenue of the Americas so that non-New Yorkers can read the signs. But Ace Books, 1120 Avenue of the Americas when Wollheim was running it, and that can go on forever. Bain to Delray, Warner Aspect, Tor now in the Flatiron Building, landmark. But you can go on forever and leave people out. But being here in New York in the year 2000, I have the same sense of awe. Looking at the future cities and the Golden Age stories that I read. I felt that this morning. I walked over the Brooklyn Bridge in the rain this morning, and thanks, Paul, for the lovely weather. I know you were in charge of that part of it, but it's not just that the future's here and those present are lucky enough to have made it to the year 2000. But in my heart, I really felt that New York is the city of the future. That it began to be built here. And when you walk around this weekend, if you're quiet, you can sense the spirit of Hugo Gernsback watching over us, and you can be very happy because unlike the writers who are around, and he was alive, at least he doesn't owe you any money. Sadly, there are those who have left us more recently than Hugo Gernsback, and so we have to turn to a more somber moment when we bid farewell to the colleagues and the friends who could not be with us tonight. And if I've left anyone off this list, please forgive us, but we can have a moment of silence for the people who are not with us. Barrington Bradley, Howard Brown, Frank B. Briney, Catherine Crook Buchanan, Joseph H. Delaney, Clifton Fallon, Muriel Gold, James Goldstone, Edward Gorey, Lawrence James, Eddie Jones, Gil Kane, Gene Carl, David Karp, DeForest Kelly, Stanley Kubrick, Marie Landis, George Laskowski, Adele Leone, Michael McDowell, Art Salha, Mark Schilzinger, John Slatteck, Robert Sobel, Larry Sterning, Carol Thole, James Turner, A. Van Vogt, James White, and Walt Willis. Let's just have a moment of silence to reflect on the missing friends and colleagues. Now we come to the awards themselves. Last, right? But first, I have to say something. We go to these things, and the nebulas are billed the Oscars of the science fiction community. I always hear that, the Oscars. And we have it nailed in certain ways. You know, it is the Oscars. The evening goes on forever. It's like the Oscars. I'm not speeding along, I know, but it's like the Oscars. You know, you take the moment for fallen friends, but we can't really say that we like the Oscars because there are a couple of things we're missing. We don't bother to present the rules. I can live with that, I guess. I can live with that. But, well, more than one thing that the Oscars don't have, and the Nebulas don't have, that the Oscars have is the musical number. That the Oscars don't have. And I think, Paul, where is our musical number? Where is our musical number? We never have a musical number. So I decided to take care of that. And I only hope that Syphil will forgive me. And it won't, I know it won't, but more importantly, I only hope that Elvis will forgive me. Are you hopeful tonight? Will you win one tonight? Is that nebula soon to be yours? Do your thoughts start to stray to some far future day when winning could open some doors? Is the pit of your stomach all tender and weak? If you get to the stage, will you fumble or speak? Will a trophy you gain or loser remain? Writers, here are you hopeful tonight? I wonder if you're hopeful tonight. You know, Ted Sturgeon once said that 90% of SF is fraud and the other 10% is what got you here tonight. Fate has me playing Toastmaster with you as the nominees. Act 1 was when you wrote your story and got it published. You wrote your piece so cleverly and rushed to cash the check. Then came Act 2. Your book came out and you hoped for 10 writers to put it on the preliminary ballot. Then you blackmailed your friends to get on the final ballot. Because you'd rather not write at all than go on living without a Nebula Award. And now I'm story is beaten by no award, then they can bring the curtain down. Will a trophy you gain for a loser remain? Writers, here are you hopeful tonight? Chosen to recognize the period achievement of cinematic science fiction in a variety of ways. We started out recognizing screenplays in 1974, where we gave on trophies for 1973, and started off by giving Best Dramatic Presentation to Soylent Green, based on the work of Harry Harrison, and then projects such as Sleeper by Woody Allen and Young Frankenstein. Gave a special award to Star Wars in '78. It's a short-lived award which returns this year, and here's a warning for next year's voters who might be trying to get Battlefield Earth that trophy. It would be easier to get that posthumous Hubbard Grandmaster Award. So well, the range this year is interesting. In the category, we have two films, Devil's Arithmetic and The Iron Giant, based on existing novels. Two, The Matrix and The Sixth Sense, based on scripts written by authors who directed their own films. And one film, The Uranus Experiment, based on the idea that there might just be more exciting hobbies than collecting old pulp magazines. To announce this year's winner, we've chosen a man who's been successful on the page and on the screen to give out the awards. The only man in the history of creative arts happier for making the acquaintance of a mouse than Walt Disney. Daniel Keyes, please come back.
Finalists in the category of script: The Iron Giant, Brad Bird and Tim McCandless, Warner Brothers, August 1999, based on the book The Iron Man by Ted Hughes. The Matrix, Larry and Andy Wachowski, Warner Brothers, March '99. The Sixth Sense, M. Night Shyamalan, I hope I got it right, Hollywood Pictures, August '99. The Devil's Arithmetic, Robert J. Averitt, Showtime Television, 28 March '99, based on the novel The Devil's Arithmetic by Jane Leoler. The Uranus Experiment, Part 2, John Milliman, Private Black Label, June '99, DVD, CD, and VHS, US, released March '99 in Europe. May I have the envelope? Price Waterhouse is here tonight. Hope I don't get a paper cut. Give us. All right. The winner is The Sixth Sense.
I think this is an excellent choice, and I've had the opportunity to talk to some of the people who have been involved with publicizing this film, and I can tell you that Mr. Shyamalan, I think is how it's pronounced, but God only knows, is a big fan of science fiction, and will be honored to receive this award, as are the producers at Disney Films, or more specifically at Hollywood Films. And this goes a long way to show that if it's a Hollywood film, it doesn't have to stink. So thank you very much on behalf of the Hollywood community in awarding this award.
Well, as we get into the print awards, there's just one thing I want to point out for the people who are sitting back, worrying about, am I going to win or am I going to lose? And don't worry about winning. I just want to list some other losers here so that you know what kind of losers there are in science fiction. These are works that have lost nebulas. If you lose, this is what the rank you'll be in. Stand on Zanzibar by John Bruno. Do Androids Read with Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. Lord of Light, Roger Zelazny. All Flesh is Grass by Clifford Simak, and Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. Those are all awards that did not win. So if you should not have the win, you still could be as good as those. But anyway, it's now time to give out the award for Best Short Story, and I know it's been a difficult year for the short story. Everyone's in mourning now that science fiction age is dead, which I know is the most earth-shaking blow that the field has ever seen since that night in the jacuzzi back in the '74 Worldcon. Those of you who were there will remember. But winning this award puts you in August company as well. Back in 1966, the first short story Nebula went to Harlan Ellison for a Penn Harlequin said the Tic-Tac Man. And just remember when you get this trophy on whose shoulders you're standing, here are some other works that we recognize now and then. I didn't mean it that way. I heard that. No. I Am Gomorrah by Samuel R. Delaney. Passengers by Bob Silverberg. When It Changed, Joanna Russ. Love is a Plan, The Plan is Death. Tip 3, Alice Sheldon. Jeff the is 5. Harlan Ellison. Grotto the Dancing Deer by Clifford Simak. And Bears Discover Fire by Terry Bisson, who will be our presenter. Wait, Terry, not so bad. Now, I first heard of Terry long before most science fiction fans. It was about 30 years back, and he was the editor of a wonderful piece of black and white comic book schlock called Web of Horror. Back about 30 years ago, and this so destroyed Terry's reputation in the field that to recover, he had to sit out the rest of the 70s by doing lots of drugs, joining a commune, getting the hell out. And during that time, it made some people happy, but he decided during that time to think about the lead comics. He wanted to choose a field where he could get more respect, a field where the world would look up to him, so he chose science fiction. And it was the drugs, wasn't it? So let's now bring up Terry, who's going to announce a short story, but more importantly than having won one himself, thanks to Terry, we can all say that we read Playboy for the short stories.
Thanks very much. Everybody's talking about the demise of SFH, and it's no joke as a short story writer, because I think the field really does need a large print magazine for older readers. So I think we're going to miss it. The nominees for the best short story of the year are Constance Ash for Flower Kiss, Bruce Holland Rogers for The Dead Boy at Your Window, Francis Sherwood for Basil the Dog, Michael Swanwick for Ancient Engines, there's something wrong there, Michael Swanwick for Radiant Doors. Leslie Watt, The Cost of Doing Business. It's actually blue shit. And the winner is Leslie Watt.
Well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Bruce Holland Rogers. losers, and I accept this award on Leslie's behalf with mixed feelings. Leslie sent me the text of her acceptance speech in 2 emails. The second email was a PS at the end. So here's what she said. I have spent entirely too long thinking about things to say if I win a nebula. If I lose, I will have wasted my time. If I win, I will have wasted my time, only I can pretend I was doing something necessary. If I lose, my words will be recycled into another speech, assuming that I ever win anything. If I never win anything, the paper will be recycled, but the sentiments will die. If I win, I would like to thank Bruce for giving this speech with the intended amount of dispassion and good humor. If I win, I intend to sell this speech on eBay. If I lose, hello, Shredder. When reminded of my betters who have not yet won a Nebula Award, I can only feel humbled at having been chosen from a field that included 5 other stories that I greatly admire. Assuming I win. If I lose, I can gloat, secure in the knowledge that I, like so many not Nebula Award-winning writers whose work I read for inspiration, insight, and entertainment, am unappreciated. If I win, I would like to thank Damon Knight and Kate Wilhelm for their mentoring and patience. I would like to thank Kim Mohan for publishing The Cost of Doing Business in Amazing Stories. I would like to thank Kim and the Wizards of the Coast for taking the time, expense, and effort to send copies of said story to SUFWA members. I would like to thank these people even if I lose, but tough luck. If anyone else wins, I would like to offer him or her my heartfelt congratulations, but if I lose, that won't be with as much sincerity as I'd like. It should be easier to say something meaningful to the other losers. If I win, I would like to thank those who took the time to read and vote for Nebulas, even if you didn't vote for me. If I lose, I doubt I will feel as charitable. And here's the PS from the second email. PS, Bruce was robbed.
Before we give out the award for Best Novel, I have an announcement to make. You've heard the news yesterday about Warren Pine going on Andy Porter. I know you've heard that. Well, while the rest of us were enjoying ourselves at the cocktail party, he's been out transacting business. And DNA Publications and Warren Pine completed negotiations with both Penny Press and Ed Furman. And that means that Lapine and DNA now publish Weird Tales, Aboriginal Fantastic Stories, Absolute Magnitude, and more. And the only one whose DNA gets around more is O.J. Simpson. That's all I have to say about that. And that's it. But now the first novel I had to win in this category was Doors of His Face, The Lamps of His Mouth by Roger Zelazny. So let's say, put that in perspective here. Over the years, we've also honored these in this category. Behold the Man, Michael Moorcock. Time Considers the Helix of Semi-Precious Stones by Samuel R. Delaney. Slow Sculpture by Theodore Sturgeon. Bicentennial Man by Isaac Asimov. Sand Kings by George R. R. Martin. And Flowers of All-Lit Prison by Nancy Criss. Who will be represented this evening. It's very good, Nancy. One in this category. And I've read all of Nancy's work. Read all of her work, and we've all read all of her work, I know. I have one question that I know is on everyone's mind. It's a personal question, so I figured this is the best time to ask it. Nancy, I read Beggars in Spain, all the novels, all the short stories, and I just have this one question. Charles Sheffield?
a dying field. It's dying, it's dead, that sucker is gone. It's watered down from what it once was, it's becoming formulaic, it's becoming homogenized. In fact, it's becoming so formulaic, some people say, that the only thing we'll all be left to write is imitations of Battlefield Earth. The screenplay version. However, a look at the nominees in the novelette category for this year give the lie to that statement, to all of those statements. The nominees in the novelette category this year demonstrate the full range that speculative fiction is capable of. They range over space, time, mood, tone, and intention. They go from the fantastic past, represented by Island in the Lake, the fantastic present in How to Make Unicorn Pie and 5 Days in April, the science fictional present in Good Intentions, the science fictional future in Taklamakan and Mars is No Place for Children. The tech in them ranges from swords to nanotech. The venues go all the way from a wooded countryside to an empty desert to a big city to small towns, all the way out to Mars. The situations take us into the tragic, the heroic, the funny, the sobering, and in the case of Bruce Sterling, the ridiculously absurd. What do we get from looking at this wide range? I think what we get is a sense that science fiction is still very much a rich and complex and varied field, and that we should all be grateful that it is so, and that while only one of these stories can win, all of them could easily represent the range that we're capable of. So the nominees Bruce Sterling, and Mars is No Place for Children, Mary Trizell. And the winner is Mars is No Place for Children.
liveliest minded, most imaginative and creative and warm-hearted group of people I know. So many friends, so many mentors. For me, it doesn't get any better than this. Thank you, and especially to Scott and my husband, Jeff Landis, who helped me so much with research, and the Mars Society, who are obviously not here. And two people who are not anything to do with science fiction. My son, Jack Brizzy, who provided a lot of inspiration for some of the things that happened in there, and a woman by the name of Evelina Smith, who's a researcher that gave me some ideas, like for, substance and things like that. And Algis Butters, who I consider one of my mentors. And the members of the Clarion class of '85,
We now come to the Best Novella Award, and novellas need markets to publish them, and growing magazines are important to the field. And as many of you know, in an attempt to keep the history, I'm really on a history thing here, the history of the field, Pirate Writings has just changed its name to Fantastic Stories. It's a proud companion to Amazing Stories. And I did speak to Ed McFadden, who was the editor of the reincarnated Fantastic. He wanted me to know the name is not the only thing that he is changing with that. He wants to really keep with the traditions of Fantastic Stories. So he's going to attempt to incorporate in himself the attributes of former editors and publishers of that magazine so that he really keeps the history of the field going. So you'll be seeing in the future from Fantastic Stories the lofty business standards of Sol Cohen, the speedy turnaround time of Ted White, and most importantly, the cheerful, boyish optimism of Barry Melsberg. That's what we have to look forward to in the future of the field. Now, back in '66, the first Best Novella Award resulted in one of the few ties that SIP had. It was between The Saliva Tree by Brian Aldrich. I don't know these people who burn out young. and He Who Shaves by Roger Zelazny. And once more I ask, remember, you're not just getting an award, but a place in history in the field. So some of the works that we have honored in the novella category include The Last Castle by Jack Vance, Dragon Rider by Anne McCaffrey, The Boy and His Dog by Harlan Ellison, Ill-Met Lankmar by Fritz Leiber, Death of Dr. Island by Gene Wolfe, Born with the Dead, Robert Silverberg, Houston, Houston, Do You Read? By James Hickory Jr., The Persistence of Vision by John Varley, and Another Orphan by John Kessel, who will be presenting this year's award. And I'll tell you something about John, wherever he is. Oh, there you are. I'm glad that you're here tonight. One of the few people I'm able to look up to here in the field. They're very few, but I want to warn you about John. And you all know about John, but I was thinking, and I realized Paul is not really solely responsible for the death of science fiction. I do have to relieve him of some small amount of blame because, let me tell you about John Kessel. I published a story of his at the end, and afterwards I find out, oh yeah, I killed Galileo, and I stole them a story, and he gives me this whole list. I published a story ages gone, so I want to do this tonight in front of all the other editors here to warn them about the effect that man's work has, because I do not want to be responsible for another editor in my shoes shut down in early youth, young prime, and it's over. So I just want you to be aware of that. So actually, I love John very much. I'm seeing other writers on the side.
What I want to know is, did you know the magazine was going under when you bought that story for me? Yes, I'm John Kessel. It is my honor. It's great against tall people. These things are way down here. It's my honor to present the 1999 Nebula for Best Novella, which, as you know, I won myself in 1982. So, knowing how nervous the nominees can get waiting for this announcement, I want to get on and award the thing. But I couldn't let the moment pass without noting that this is the next to last Nebula of the millennium. I did not say the last Nebula of the millennium. Even though it is the year 2000, tonight we are awarding the 1999 Nebula. So the same story can win the 1990 Nebula and the 2000 Hugo Award. But that's one of the charming historic quirks of SFWA. It's made this writers' organization a laughing. It's made this writers' organization storied in song and story all over the planet. And because of SFWA's log rolling, SFWA's rolling eligibility system, next year we may end up giving the 2001 nebula to a 1999 story. If there is a next year. Because even if this were the 2000 nebula we were giving, it wouldn't be the first nebula of the new millennium. Because, I mean, who do we think we're fooling? This real millennium hasn't arrived yet. Not until 2001. I may not be known as a high-tech writer, but I'm not convinced all these computers are going to take kindly to adding that one at the end of the year. And let me reassure you, living in North Carolina, as I do, I certainly haven't sold my automatic rifles. Or my Teflon-coated ammunition. No siree, Bob. And I'm still working out daily on the standing bicycle powering the electric generator. Thank you very much. And the bunker, of course. Sue would have come with me here this weekend, but she's still pumping out the bunker from the last hurricane. As if I bring her to the Sin City where politicians fool around with their employees to the point where their nether regions are all dried up. As I say, having won the Nebula Award myself in 1982, so far inexplicably the only nebula I have won, I realize that the novella form has an illustrious history, as Scott has been telling us a little bit about. The length of the novella has traditionally allowed a depth of characterization unachievable in the short story, and yet a dramatic concentration unavailable to the novel. Some of the greatest stories of all time have been novellas, from The Man Who Would Be King to The Turn of the Screw outside of our genre, and within the genre, The Time Machine, Universe, Baby is Three. So you nominees out there sweating bullets to your expensive silk shirts, just remember the giants whose monstrously big shoes you're attempting so pitifully to fill. I mean, just look at the previous winners in the novella category. Scott has mentioned some. Behold the Man by that great Moorcock. Boy and His Dog by Don Johnson. Liber, Born with the Dead by Robert Silverberg, Houston, Houston, Do You Read by James Hickory Jr., R&R by Lucius Shepard, Beggars in Spain by the Crespade, The Saliva Tree by that other Brit, what's his name, Adult, Oldest, and the list of writers who've won, Gene Wolfe, John Varley, Arthur C. Clarke, Connie Willis, Jack Vance, Kim Stanley Robinson, James Morrow, Joe Haldeman, Greg Bear, Roger Zelazny. To which illustrious list we will add our winner tonight. So without further ado, this year's nominees for the 1999 Nebula Award for Best Novella are... Did I mention that I won a Nebula Award? 1982. Well, it was 1982. It was in New York here, down... You know, I think actually we're having the leftovers from that. The nominees for the 1999 Nebula for Best Novella are Reality Check by Michael A. Burstein from Analog. The Astronaut from Wyoming by Adam Troy Castro and Jerry probably about the same length as the story of Another Orphan, which won a Nebula in 1982. The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang from Living Trust by L. Timo Duchamp from Asimov. The Executioner's Guild by Andy Duncan. Wedding Album by David Marusic. I always wanted to be Johnny Carson book. at the
Just
end of
open
this.
the damn thing.
The winner for Best Novella is The Story of Your Life by Ted Chiang.
This is the reason my microphone is at this thing. Like Leslie Watt, Ted emailed an acceptance speech. Like Leslie, he originally mailed one of the same length as the work that won. So you were going to get the short version. When I was writing this story, I wasn't sure anyone would get what I was trying to do. So it's very gratifying that the story has gotten such a favorable response. Thanks to everyone who voted for it. I'd like to give special thanks to my friend Juliet Albertson for her encouragement when I was writing this story, and to Karen Joy Fowler for sharing anecdotes about motherhood. On behalf of Ted Chiang, thank you.
I was just passed a note from Paul Levinson, and I've been told that in trying to cement his popularity as president, he decided to take a stand that all future nebula ceremonies will have one important rule, and that's no singing is allowed. They changed that rule there, Paul, I don't know. But we're now going to Best Novel, and once more, the novels that won that award before have been classics, so if you do win, you'll be in heavy company here. First time it was given out back in '66 was for Dune by Frank Herbert, followed by some books you might have heard of: Rite of Passage, Alexei Panshin, Left-Handed Darkness, Ursula K. Le Guin, Ringworld, Larry Niven, Gods Themselves, Isaac Asimov, Rendezvous with Rama, Arthur C. Clarke, Timescape by Greg Benford, Neuromancer by William Gibson, Doomsday Book, Connie Willis, and The Forever War by Joe Haldeman, who will be coming up to the stage in a moment. In a moment, to present this award, and we're having Joe do the honors now because his books, Forever War, Forever Peace, are novels that had to be written, and I'm very thankful for them because I can't sleep some nights and I open them and I'm out of it. But the real reason that we allow him to do this is his most important attribute, and that is gay. Hold on. It's not for gay Haldeman. It's not for gay Haldeman. We could have gotten rid of him a long time ago. And we wonder, why does she keep Joe? I mean, I've always wondered this. Why does she keep Joe Haldeman? And I'm happy to announce, last night, I was able to find out the real reason. Joe and I, we had a few drinks. And there was a jacuzzi in the suite. And one thing led to another. But we're in front of friends here, so I can say that last night I learned the real reason why Joe is known as the Forever Man. So let's have a big hand for Mr. Gay Haldeman!
I had a long stick about calendrics, but I seem to have lost that with the last presenter, so I won't take up your time with it. We have 6 good books here. Parable of the Talents by Octavia Estelle Butler. The Cassini Division by Jane Mission Child by Marie McHugh. The Clash of Kings by George R.R. Martin. Mockingbird by Sean Stewart.
Werner Benzig, A Deepness in the Sky. Maybe I should have left my glasses on. I hope this is in large type. Yes, it is. Estelle?
I really appreciate this, and I think it makes it worth all the pain that I went through trying to write a story that obviously did not want to be written and would not let me alone. Thank you very much.
Scott Edelman and his Hugo Awards. I'm looking out for another editor that I could pick to host the thing next year. I don't know. We get now to the denouement of our evening. The presentation of the Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America's Grand Master Award. Now, there are many things that can be said about the Grand Master Award, many things that have been said, many things that I can say, but I think sometimes, truly, a picture is worth 1,000 words, and many pictures are worth many more words than that. So let me just say briefly, this past December, I had occasion to be at David Harbaugh's house, which, by the way, is no easy thing. His house is at the bottom of a hill, which always ices over in the winter. So, as you approach the house, there's always a 50-50 chance that you'll wind up smashed into a tree. But this time I did get to his house, and I met a gentleman by the name of Eric Solstein, who is a very gifted filmmaker. And I'd like to introduce Eric to you now, who will say just a few words about something very special that you'll all see up on that screen over there in another minute or two. Eric?
Good evening. Someone is not doing a very good job of taking care of the history of your genre. I have a couple of little illustrative stories. I have a client who knew I was working on a documentary about science fiction, and he told me about something that happened about 15 years ago. He was walking down the streets of Manhattan, happened upon a dumpster, saw some interesting artwork falling out, rummaged about a little bit, and he realized that this was some kind of sort of science fiction stuff. Some sort of editor's office had been emptied out. He didn't have time to spend much time there. He was in a bit of a hurry. Went home, came back the next day, it was all gone. It was outside the offices of Gernsback Publications. It happened to have been the contents of Hugo Gernsback's office, and it's all, most of it is gone, whatever was recovered before that time.
Well, there's other stories, and maybe they're worse than that. James Gunn made a series of beautiful films in the early 70s, and can you imagine where they ended up once upon a time? In a dumpster on the campus of the university, pardon me, on the campus of Jim's University, University of Kansas. And I went and met with Jim, and we went through his films, and I spent hours and hours going through hundreds of feet of footage looking for something that wasn't crumpled, that wasn't scratched, that hadn't faded. And ultimately, I brought back a immensely heavy case of films to New York City, and we restored these films, and now there are brand new digital masters in existence. I presented to the University of Kansas a complete set of masters. What Jim had when I met him was VHS copies. But that's really the least of it. About 5 months ago, I was in conversation with a lady who takes care of the affairs of the camps, and trying to arrange to visit them in Plano, Texas, to do an interview. And we talked over the course of several weeks. There was a lot of debate in the family and with Mr. DeCamp, and the decision was finally made that they could not represent themselves in a way that they would like to be remembered. So the taping never occurred, and certain material will never enter the public record as a result. Now, I'm sure that there's people here that remember the way he carried himself, the way he spoke, what he had opinions about. You may remember these things well, but what is going to happen to your memory someday? Tonight I'm going to be presenting a 10-minute piece that I have prepared from the body of work I've been accumulating, especially for this audience. It is an attempt to convey, in some small sense, something essential to each of the 17 Grandmasters. I'm not sure I was able to do that as well as I would have liked, but I hope you enjoyed the piece. It is drawn from a larger project. I am attempting to create a living history of the science fiction literature entitled Possible Future, and the first release from this will be a feature film called The Secret Life of the Science Fiction Writer. It is about the challenge of being true to yourself at the same time you're trying to put food on the table. That is where I begin my stand in preserving your history. Thank you very much.
Science goes on with science fiction as the searchlight. Here is the picture, if we can but see it. A universe ruled by the human mind, a new golden age of fair cities, of new laws, new machines, of human capabilities undreamed of a civilization that has conquered matter and nature, distance and time, disease and death. A glorious picture of an empire that lies away past a million flaming suns until it reaches the black infinity of unknown space and extends beyond. The idea of the final product of evolution is beyond us, but a sublime picture that science fiction may build through the ages and science may realize for the ultimate advancement of man. Well, that was a little overdone. That was the basic training of a lot of young kids who were reading science fiction. But I was also hoping to win a prize from Hugo Awards back, so I wanted to paint the rosiest picture I could.
In the 30s, science fiction fans were stellar Christians. We knew the whole world was against us, and we huddled together so we could talk to each other, because there was no one else we could talk to. And actually, cellar is the right word because most of the clubs were held in someone's basement. In order to start a science fiction club, you needed a house with a basement.
I have never been afflicted with false modesty or true modesty. And so I might as well say that during the 1940s, I wrote robot stories as an example of engineer-oriented science fiction, and the foundation stories, which are rather in the older tradition of the wide-spanning galactic romance, both were more successful in later time than they were at the moment. That's why I say through hindsight, looking back now, it seems to me that I was a major entry in the race then, although at the time, I must admit, I was never aware of being anything but a minor writer.
He is trying to perfect the human Nale Superman who's able to be telekinetic, telepathic, have these abilities to repel this anticipated alien invasion. And he does. He does ultimately do all these things through a series of incidents that may or may not all be thoroughly explained at the end.
And then there was a thrill for bylines that have just been names to us, Otis Adelbert Klein and Frank R. Paul and Ray Cummings and L. Sprague de Camp. Here were three-dimensional human beings.
It was at the time of World War II, and I was terribly disillusioned with what the human race was doing to itself. I was extremely upset at the idea that we could continue to use war as a matter of national policy. I was upset by man's inhumanity to man. We were hearing about Dachau and some of the other camps.
I married at one point to write a bad story that you criticized. It's called Rattlesnake Cave. I've always wanted to put that thing in an anthology somewhere, but Lester's daddy wouldn't appreciate it.
The thing that strikes you about the literary writers is that each one was working more or less by himself, apart from all the others. Whereas the commercial writers at this time were building up a set of shared assumptions, the widespread use of space travel, the galactic empire, and even a set of shorthand terms, a kind of jargon, hyperdrive, space warp, and so on, which helped them get on with their stories, but repelled and irritated the literary writers and readers even more.
It must have been on July 2nd, 1939, the first day of the World Cup. And he talked about me, and I wasn't too anxious. I said, I only handle professionals, but he pleaded with me. So I said, all right, send me your stories and I'll see what I can do. Stories.
They are limited to, I think, something like 41 spells, which are ancient, which were discovered long ago, and nobody is discovering new spells, and nobody really knows how to go about researching new spells. And so they have the excellent prismatic spray, which is a grand spell if you want to kill somebody who's near at hand. The kind of spells that they need, something that would enable them to leave Earth, or something that would enable them to renew the life of the sun, they haven't done.
When I was teaching at New Mexico Military Institute years ago, I was so surprised to discover that she was the favorite author of the Cadet Corps. Of course, that is not another gender-specific name. She wrote very successfully and wrote material that was accessible to many readers.
I'm not sure that I could handle it very well. I had a rather Victorian upbringing, regard sex as a private matter. On the other hand, there is a marine worm which reproduces as it crawls along the ocean bottom by grabbing onto something firmly with its hind legs and keeping crawling with the front ones and pulling itself apart. And I, in recent months, have been wondering if the Meskonites reproduced that way, what would they regard as pornography?
We want the author to take the building blocks he has laid out before our eyes and make them into something we would never have imagined
things that Heinlein is constantly trying to do, an educated gauchiste. He's not into, he doesn't want to shock the bourgeoisie, he wants to make the left wake up. And so even though he's talking from a highly conservative position, he's always addressing the left. He's a person who would much rather go to a party and argue with a bunch of smart socialists than hang out with the libertarians and the Republicans who he's actually committed to.
Except everywhere, and I feel back when they gave Heinlein the Grandmaster. And after the ceremony, after the evening, Heinlein was just sitting in a chair with his huge ornament beside him and accepting, a long winding line of people who just wish him well and talk to him. And Bester was on it, and I found myself behind Bester. And some guy came over and said to Bester, if you're very good, maybe someday they'll give you one of those. You have the gall to come here and patronize and condescend to Alfred Bester, the author of The Demolished Man? Who the hell do you think? And I began to rave, and Bester put a hand on my arm, and with infinite wisdom said, Barry, it's okay, Barry, let it go.
Are you lonesome tonight? Well, I'm all shook up. Well, it is now to welcome our newest Grandmaster to those ranks is his old and dear friend. And actually, a lot of people seem to be this man's old and dear friend. He's certainly one of mine. I've only known him for about 2 years. Sam Lundwall.
Spit it out, Sam. Oh, I'm going to tell you exactly like it is. I'm pleased to be here. I have here this enormous bunch of material here. And it starts here. Dear Sam, I'm sorry your wife doesn't understand you, but I want to help you out with your animal. Sorry. That's a note I got from Joe Waldman just now. Sorry about that, Joe. Now, I'm sorry for that. My private life won't interest you very much, would it? We're talking about Brian Aldiss, a man I'm proud to say is my only friend. And you know me, I wouldn't lie about that, would I, Brian? Nah. Well, I would like to say that in genre fiction, and particularly in science fiction, what we get is mostly what we see, and often not even that. Whereas in writers like Brian Aldiss, we get a lot more than we actually see, and it takes a long time before we realize that, what we actually see. I'm referring here to works of Brian. Some of them are not even science fiction, but I'm sure you have read. I talk here about books like Report on Probability A, Barefoot in the Head, Silky Wrecked, great that one, The Hand-Read Boy, and of course the Helconia books, which points out an enormous range of fiction, which goes far behind the science fiction field as such. And this, I think, is the thing we would like to see in the writer and artist. He creates his own universe that goes behind whatever things you are supposed to see there. There's lots more than we would expect to see. So I'll be very brief here because I know that if anyone can speak for himself, that would be Brian Aldiss, and can do it very well. So I'll just say that it's great to see Brian Aldiss finally get this award that he has been deserving for so very long. And I'm pleased to present to you Mr. Brian Aldiss, the man I'm proud to say is the Marcello Mastroianni of science fiction. Hero, Brian! I don't even get a cloak. I mean, I've been writing fiction for 64 years, you know. They're pretty slow. However, I would be an ungrateful son of a bitch if I didn't yield a few thanks to you. First of all, I have to thank our president, Mr. Paul Levinson, the Bonus. I won't say the Bonus what, I'll just say the Bonus. And thanks to all the sagacious members of SFWA for their wisdom and their forgetfulness. Yes, it's nice of you to forgive and in particular to have forgotten. And of course, to Mary Shelley for starting all this. And for all those dear ones that I've left at home, but naming no names. And to Charlie Brown. Are you still up, Charlie? Whom I met at David Hartwell's place up at Bard Hall 30 years ago, when Locus was just a mimeographed sheet. Great days, and thanks to my pals in the IAFA, who have shown up here in support, or what they call support. Many of them indeed honeymooners, who've left the Carolinas, come here in search of a better climate. One of which I have to say is such a beautiful and wondrous creature, and looks so gorgeous tonight. Congratulations, Andy. And of course to Sam Lundvall, my only friend. Oh, and his daughter Karen. Karen is wearing her new smoker's jacket. Stand up, Karen, let's all see. Oh, there she is. Oh, she's and of course, to Gordon Van Gelder, who publishes the kindest, wisest man on the planet. He's out having a pee. I wish I was. And of course to my hairdresser. And also to Alice Turner, who danced so joyously with me at the tour party yesterday. I was really sorry when Tom Dougherty checked us out. Oh, and what does this say? Oh yes, and thanks to all of us for the family feeling that SF engenders. Oh, and stop this all this. Get on with your speech. You didn't think I was going to do that all night, did you? For God's sake. Well, tolerant. I see many of the previous grandmasters are actually no longer in this world. It makes me wonder how long I've got. I better speed up with this speech. It's been my lucky year. When was that? November. I know it's last century, but it's within a 12-month. I was awarded the Prix Utopia in Futuroscope in Poitiers, France. And I was given a lovely figurine that embodies every man's vision of utopia. It showed a green female demon with a long tail and big tits. Oh, the French. And then, oh yes, a claim I'll make. I'm the only person who sold a story to Stanley Kubrick and 2 to Steven Spielberg, okay? And now, great master. Look, my cup runneth over. I will have to leave you. I'm joking. But I did, as I claim, begin telling stories 64 years ago. I began as an oral storyteller in the way that we understand legendary storytellers began. Because at the age of 7, I was sent to boarding school. This was the way the British had to harden their children off. You either died or you survived to go in the army. And the good fortune was that we had recently, my father had bought a house that was haunted. I mean, there was no doubt it was really haunted. And my sister and I were very scarified about this. So when I was shut in this little nasty dark dormitory with the lights out, I would tell them ghost stories with that chill of authenticity in them that would make the kids scream and go under the ventilators and say, "Shut up, Aldous, you bastard!" Power. Then I moved on to another school, a bigger and nastier school, what we call a private school. I believe you call them, we call them public schools. Yeah, you maybe call them private schools, where the dormitories were very large and formidable, had 30 beds in with 30 nasty little ruffians in them. And it was the thing that at night, after the lights were out, no talking. A strictly enforced rule. But nevertheless, the new kids were made to get up and stand on their beds and tell a story. Okay? Now, if people didn't like the story, they flung shoes at the guy. Never a shoe was flung at me. And I had competition from another boy who used to tell stories about otters, and beavers, and various creatures who lived in the wild. He was a very good storyteller, but my stories were much more violent. They were about renegade planets that came through the solar system, wreaking disaster, or about terrible frogmen who came out of the Sargasso Sea. Remember the good old Sargasso Sea? And there were also terrible robots that came from the depths of the ocean. All these were the material for my story. And I also had this idea that after maybe 20 minutes of storytelling, I would stop at a cliffhanger. And once more the cry would go out, "Come on, you bastard, tell us more." "Sorry, I haven't made up anything more, you have to wait till tomorrow." And that way I became the champion storyteller of the dormitory. There was a penalty to be paid for this. At the door, there was a little listening post. The housemaster who was in charge of us would listen. He heard someone speaking. Come in with his cane twitching. Who was talking? Reluctantly, I'd sit up. "Come out here, Aldous." And I would be made to bend down in my pajamas and get 6 of the best. You never fear critics after that. astounding. This was in John Campbell's heyday. It was during the war. It was very difficult to find astoundings. I mean, you wouldn't believe this, but there was a street in London, Cecil Street, and you could go there, and it was the porn district. And so there'd be old men in Macs in the front of the shop reading the porn. You had to go to the back of the shop to get a science fiction. Really awful. So, but I've never read anything, I think, with more intensity than I read Astounding in the days of John W. Campbell. And in particular, those wonderful stories of A. Van Vogt. And when you're a child, you know, you think that this is soaringly intellectual stuff that you can't quite figure out. Well, it's because he wasn't making sense. It's wonderful training for the intellect to read a Van Vogt novel. What's this saying? White Mars. Oh God, well, I better say something about some of my books, or you think I'm more of a fraud than you already think I am. Something that Dan Keyes was saying about how you teach children to empathize and collaborate. I believe that sentiment is at the heart of White Mars. I have, by the way, this is the book that Gordon Van Gell has just published. I'm talking about 6,000 Crusoes stranded on the planet Mars. And they're not going to survive unless they collaborate. The great and wise Darwin didn't speak only about nature red in tooth and claw. He also spoke about instances of collaboration instead of competition. And the monster that the Earth people find on Mars is indeed enormous, but it too is an example of collaboration and survival through collaboration. If we picked up that message from Darwin, the Earth might be a happier place than it is at the moment. So there's no doubt that one of my early influences was certainly Astounding. But I was reading a lot of other things. And also, one good thing we did at school in the war was we were always summoned to hall to listen to the oratory of Winston Churchill with this great rolling voice. We will never give in, we will fight on the beaches, in the fields, and in the toilets. It's very, very, very inspiring stuff. I never met Churchill, and actually while we were at school, we found that H.G. Wells was still alive. We couldn't believe it. We read all these books from the library, and most, literature is about dead guys, right? So most of these guys were dead, and then we found that Wells was still alive. He only died at the end of the war. And although I never met him, there was a period, this was in the 70s, when I met one of Wells's many mistresses. I should tell you about this lady. And her name was Baroness Moira Budberg, quite a well-known name. And she had been the secretary and mistress of Maxim Gorky. She became Wells's mistress. She became the mistress of Prokoschka, the painter. And I mean, she was a very valiant lady. She did her duty. And somehow, I can't remember how we got together, but she would summon me. She was then in her 80s, a very commanding woman. And she would summon me for 6 o'clock. I would go to her apartment in the Cromwell Road. We would sit down together on either side of a little table. She would summon her companion, a lady dressed in black, very Russian, just like Moira, and as portly as she. And the companion would bring on a silver tray a bottle of Stolnichaya brandy, vodka, and 2 glasses with ice in. Moira and I would converse. Mainly I asked the questions and she gave the answers. And we would drink until the bottle was empty. And then I would be dismissed. Find my way muzzily back into the street. Why do I tell you that? Well, because I treasure this link with the past. She was an extraordinary woman. She was a talent spotter at the end of her days in the Universal movies. So I think she must have got involved with, what was it called? Battlestar Galactica. No relation to Battlefield, and she decided that she wanted a better climate, and she would retire to Italy to live in Tuscany with her sister. And so she left the salubrious climate of London for the wastes of Tuscany. Well, I'm sorry to say she died after 3 months. So there we are, that was a link with the past. The pleasures of old age are that one can perceive the patterns and shapes of life. God, the lighting isn't very good. Are they economizing? That's the rates getting in the room. I can't read what I put here. Well, it's about the way that one changes and develops and the way times change. These are some of the pleasures that you get from reading Anthony Pole's great series of novels, Dance to the Music of Time. Pole's just died too. But as you read each novel as it was published, you get a sense of all the people that you knew in your life who kind of fade out for a few years and then come back again. They've changed and you've changed and a new relationship starts. And that is one of the fascinating things as life goes on. Great compensation for being young, and ugly, and untalented. Oh yeah, talking of which, I won't start that sentence now. I'll cancel that. I was delighted to see that Ted Chiang's story got an award, The Story of Your Life. It's a marvelous, marvelous story. It's in the new anthology Starlight 2. It's the job of SF, or one of its jobs, to introduce us to new modes of feeling and understanding. Sometimes, of course, it disorients us to do this. The story begins. We don't know where we are. We don't know who we are. Gradually, we begin to suss things out. It's rather like being born, the way we have to suss things out when we're babies. So we're granted a new experience through such stories. I think The Story of Your Life is a brilliant example. I should mention the anthologist, it's Patrick Nielsen, Hayden's anthology, of course. Very good work on that. And that particular story, I think, shows us a whole new way of experiencing the universe. Oh, and there's a love affair in it too, which is very nice. The result is intensely distancing, but at the same time, intensely human. Terrific story. Good. Nice to see these stories getting awards. I was talking earlier to, oh God, I never forget her name, to Carol Emshworth. Yeah. Hi, Carol. We talked about Dance to the Music of Time. Carol and I first met in Rio de Janeiro in 1969. And, well, that was a long time ago, but all sorts of strange things came of that occasion. Not so strange as my silence. Well, the fact was that those of us who were invited to Rio were very content to be there in the extraordinary tropical heat. Yeah, a lot of drinking went on there, actually. It turned out that when John Wyndham's estate came up for sale recently and was bought by the SF Foundation in Liverpool, there was an invitation for John Wyndham to go to the Rio Festival. And he wrote back and said, I really don't think I could go because I would have to drink with notorious drinkers like Kingsley Amis and Brian Aldiss. John Wyndham was a dry sherry man. But while we were there, Fred Paul and I, with Jimmy Ballard and Harry Harrison, used to sit on the beach in, what was the name of that bar, Fred? Do you remember? Oh, the Bolero! You remember the famous Bolero? A brothel at night, a bar by day. or was it vice versa? Yeah. And meanwhile, you'd see Van Vogt, Forey Ackerman would be trudging along to see yet another showing of James Whale's Frankenstein. We were sitting there enjoying ourselves and saying, oh God, this is the thing, you know, we're received internationally now. Where do we go next year? And so Fred and I made a pact. Tell me if I'm lying? Right, we made a pact. And the pact was that when we got back to our respective countries, we would see that some other country laid on a similar fest the next year. Well, Fred got back and he had problems with Galaxy, and for all I know, other problems as well, which we won't go into, Fred, will we? But I went back to London, and it struck me that the next year it was going to be Expo 70 in Japan. And I've been communicating with one Japanese fan, a man called Hiroya Endo. And so I wrote to him and said, look, why don't you lay on a science fiction symposium as the ideal thing for Expo 70? This guy worked the trick. So the next year, we found ourselves in Tokyo with Arthur Clarke, Judy Merrill, who else was there? Oh yeah, and 3 or 4 Russians. Yeah, most extraordinary. And so when we got to the hall where the conference was being held, and on one side of the table there were these stuffy old Westerners sitting down in their suits, smiling. And then in the middle of the Japanese interpreters, and on the other side, these 4 very formal Russian gentlemen in double-breasted suits, all drawn up and very serious. Well, of course, when we got to know them, we got a few bottles of vodka down. We were very friendly, almost too friendly, I would say. And so that was a great success. And I believe that from then on, there's always been this continuity of visiting other countries, going around and talking to people who have interests which actually are very similar to ours. So we come to an Irish convention in Dublin in one of those years. I think when it was maybe 1970, I don't know, where Harry Harrison founded World SF. 70? 78? One of those years. One of those long lost, forgotten years. And as a result of that, we were actually very successful. We went all around the world at our own expense, I may say. Croatia, Italy, Budapest, Chengdu in China. Eventually we brought the Cold War to an end. I have a photo of Betty Ann Hart tickling the tummy of a panda in the Wulong Panda Reserve in the deepest reaches of China. But for SF, you see, such a momentous event would never take place. And I think the record of that woman-animal relationship is embalmed somewhere in the pages of Locust. Well, I mean, the life then was very serious, but it wasn't all serious. And meanwhile, I was perfecting my talents as an actor. And one thing I did was a dialogue between 2 old ladies at a church garden fair. And one old lady says to the other, oh, there's the new rector, over there with the horn testicles. Oh, I see. He's ever so lame, isn't he? Oh, yes. His movements are terribly circumcised. But they do say
He bowls like a bull. Oh, has he really? Skip it. Forget it. Wow, yeah. The other day I was rereading an ancient poem by Edward Young, Night Thoughts, published early in our century. And I came across this couplet of great support, I would reckon, to all SF aficionados. Nothing can satisfy but what confounds. Nothing but what astonishes is true. Isn't that far-sighted? Long before the days of Uncle Hugo, there was Edward Young thinking great thoughts. The quest for new paradigms is always a source of nourishment and astonishment. But I'm very interested at the moment. I'm struggling with the concept of human intelligence and consciousness evolving. I actually had a paper published in Nature because they're going mad for the millennium, so they have SF writers to do a page. And this was about supposing human consciousness now to have reached the stage, let's say, to 100 watt light bulb, okay? Well, maybe it's been evolving along with everything else. Maybe the consciousness in Stone Age man was very dim. It was just enough to illuminate a small, limited world. And maybe at the time of the Renaissance, as you say, the Renaissance, as I say, it trumped itself up to a 60 watt bulb. It's quite possible. And so we have to think about how we'll be transformed when we've got a 1,000 watt light bulb in our heads. We'll be different people then. I don't know if you saw it the other day, but there's a new report that they've dug up, some archaeologists have dug up in Africa, fragments of a 1.7 million year old human skull. Did you see that? Which proves, well, it proves something like that. Something about when we came out of Africa. But what I wonder about is why the blind force of evolution expended so much energy in making bone sufficiently strong to survive for that long, over 1 million years. I mean, you're only going to have the use of your skull for about 100 years. It's very strange, isn't it? How's that for durability? One answer may be because there was a dreadful something back there which worked very hard to hand contemporary archaeologists a clue to our origins. Perhaps when we've figured it all out, it can't be long now, the mysterious and puissant something will emerge and take its bow. Well done, humanity. You've sussed the problem. You can go now. Remember, all this is a matter of observation. And over the last century, we've so much improved our sense of observation. We know so much more. When I think to the days I lived through in my boyhood, I believe those years were dumb and blind compared to present day. And probably, if our grandfathers came back, they would think we were living in at least a material utopia. Of course, I'm talking about the West, not the rest of the world, on which I believe, we to a certain extent live upon. As for this matter of observation, there's a story about Sherlock Holmes and Dr. Watson, who agreed to go on a camping holiday, and they went up to the mountains. When night fell, they got into their sleeping bags, they went to sleep. At 3 o'clock in the morning, Holmes wakes Dr. Watson and says, "Watson, what do you see?" And Watson says, "Well, lovely night, very clear night. See the Milky Way." "Serious?" "Oh, it was hard." "What do you see, Holmes?" Holmes says, "I see some bastards pinched our tent." myself out of a hole, and I found my first enthusiastic audience through Signet Books. In those days, Signet Books was privately owned by Victor. What's his name? Does anyone remember who owned Signet Books? Victor what? Say it again. I didn't think that was a name. Well, he was a mad Anglophile of the worst possible kind. He would come over to England once a year to suck up to royalty. You know, we don't like that, even in our own folk. But he had his son-in-law, who I knew as Uncle Mac, who looked after the manuscripts, and Signet did all my early books. They were only allowed to have 160 pages in them, but they sold like mad. Galaxies Like Grains of Sand, Starship, Hothouse. Sorry, it's called, my name reminds me of Anthony Trollope, The Long Afternoon of Earth. It wasn't my idea. I was horrified when I got the paperback and found they rechristened it. But on the whole, those books all had a great circulation. I've just signed a contract with a new publisher, 24 books on my backlist. And this is a sign of the new technology coming in. No doubt it's transitional, but now there are new machines that can turn out books on demand, okay? You want a book, they'll print it for you, and that's it. And so there's no warehousing fees, etc., etc. Also on my website, I'm about to try and sell 300 of my old stories. It's worth trying these things. I suppose I ought to say something about Heliconia, which was mentioned earlier. I started writing Heliconia in the late 70s. Well, I'd had an idea for a long time that there must be better planets where a year was not just our pathetic 365 days, but was about 5,000 Earth years. And gradually, as this was taking place, I saw the incursions of J.R.R. Tolkien upon the field, and I felt that the hard science fiction that I had, in my folly, often railed against, was being eroded and was turning into something different, what one might call, I don't know, heroic fantasy, I suppose. And so I wanted to create a massive centrale, something that was undeniably science fiction, didn't have fantasy in it. And so, after 2 years research, it's lovely living in Oxford. You knock on any door, and an old historian will come shuffling out and will tell you all you want to know about whatever you want to know about, and so on and so on. But to do that for the first time, I was very arrogant in my youth. I would never get a contract before I'd written the novel, because I didn't want anyone to get their fingers on the novel. So I would write the novel, and then I would send it to the publisher. And I think it was Fred Polby told me that this was extremely foolish. But for Heliconia, I had to have a contract. Was there going to be 3 books? And so the contract was with Jonathan Cape in England and with Athenaeum over here. Well, Athenaeum doesn't exist anymore, I think. Or maybe it's just an imprint for children's books. But in those days, it was run by a guy called Tom Stewart, who was well up on Cole Porter, and moreover, was an extremely nice guy. And so the deal that I'd signed for was that I would produce a book every 18 months regularly. Well, okay, but the books proved surprisingly popular, and there was a lot of pressure to write more quickly than I liked. And I had a dreadful dream. This was while I was still writing Heliconia Winter. I dreamt that I came over to New York, and I could see it clearly now. I went into a Barnes & Noble bookstore, and just inside they had one of these revolving things, such as you see picture postcards on. And it had a number of books on it. And I saw to my horror, there was one called The Drag Queens of Heliconia. And with horror, I picked it off the shelf. And, you know, it had dreadful illustrations, sometimes stamped in blue, sometimes stamped in red, of these drag queens. I was horrified. And I went to Athenaeum, and I said to Tom Stewart, Tom, why have you done this to me? And he said, because you're so bloody slow writing these books. Terrible, terrible. Well, they didn't ever do that. Instead, they were very good publishers. And moreover, they had a very good copywriter. And the copywriter sent me with the first volume, with a spring volume, 28 pages of suggestions or corrections that, I mean, there are obvious ones like, she's got blue eyes on page 28, and on page 300 she's got brown eyes. But also other very much more sensible suggestions, most of which I followed. And she did the same thing. I learned it was a female copy editor. She did the same thing with the second and the third one. So when I finished this, I rang Tom and I said, could you put me through to your copy editor? I want to thank her. And he said, well, hang on. Then he came on the phone again and he said, well, she never comes in here, you see. We send her packages. She goes out in Queens. So I said, well, you know, she was wonderful. They had nothing like this in Jonathan King's. Could you give me her address and her phone number? And so he did. So I sent this lady a dozen roses, and then I phoned her. And do you know what she said to me? She said, oh, Mr. Allison, I've been doing this job for 28 years. No one ever thanked me before. So, the moral of this is, if you think writing's tough, you could be a fucking copy editor. I would like to call upon my distinguished colleague and longtime friend, Mr. Joe Holman, to combine American vaudeville with English music hall in a brief terpsichorean interlude. I'm not going to sing anything after that, that's for sure. Thank you. Two very brief announcements. One, Charles Brown would like all the Nebula nominees to meet where, Charles? Back here? Okay, right over there for a picture.
And two, I hope to see all of you and many more next year in Los Angeles in 2001, the last week in April, for our 36th Nebula Banquet. Thank you very much.
Publishers can pick up my resume on the way out.